Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Leadership Conversations, brought to you by Lighthouse Leadership Strategy and Training. I'm Eric Miller. I'm a senior partner here at Lighthouse. And at Lighthouse, we make change possible by making leadership practical. We've identified business acumen as a critical competency and capability for leaders, helping to break down silos and speed up decision-making. As we went to look for the very best content in the world on this topic, we identified Acumen Learning in the US, and we have a partnership with that organization. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Kevin Cope from Acumen Learning. Kevin founded Acumen in 2002, and it is the world's leader in business acumen training. Kevin is also the author of Seeing the Big Picture, a #1 New York Times bestseller, Wall Street Journal, USA Today as well. Kevin's specialty is teaching business people, no matter their role, no matter their level, how to look at business through the lens of 5 business drivers. So Kevin, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, sir. Pleased to be with you.
And where are we finding you today?
I'm actually in my home office in Orem, Utah. I travel a fair amount, but happy to be at home right now.
Great. Always good. Well, the interview today is really just going to anchor around 5 questions, and we want to keep it pretty bite-sized for the audience. So why don't we just start off and say, from your perspective, Kevin, how do you define business acumen?
Yeah, that's a good question. And one of the most Googled things about business acumen is how do you define it? And I found that a lot of people might see that differently, but here's how I define it. It's understanding how your company makes money and then making good decisions around that money-making process. So there's really 2 parts to it. One, it's understanding your business, the business metrics you use, how you're performing. And then the other part of that is using that knowledge to then make, really good decisions for your organization. So those are kind of the 2 parts to how I would define business acumen. And maybe on a humorous note, I know there's not a lot of snow in Australia, but I saw this video once of a gentleman walking outside. It had just snowed the night before, and so he goes to his car and he's scraping it off. Pretty thorough job. He does it very, very efficiently, works really hard. And when he pushes his key fob to open the door, the car next to the one he just scraped off actually lights up. So all of that diligent work he'd just done on his car was on the wrong car. And I think business acumen is much the same way. You can find people that work hard, that work even really efficient, but it really is working effectively that's most important. In other words, working on the right problems and coming up with the right solutions for your company. And so I think business acumen really helps people to know what are the right problems to focus on in an organization, and therefore they tend to come up with the right solutions.
Oh gosh, that really resonates. We do a lot of work with leadership teams. And one of the big challenges with teams is to get them all focused on, 2 or 3 critical priorities. So I love your point. Knowing what to work on sometimes is half the battle.
Yeah, thank you.
So why is business acumen important? Shouldn't people just focus on their functional roles and leave business decisions to the executive team?
Yeah, another good question. So let me start off first by maybe describing the gap that I see in business acumen. And next, address why I think it's important. So first of all, the gap. When I started this company over 16 years ago, I assumed that this content would really be relevant for sort of that front-end individual in an organization, because I assumed that everybody else knew this stuff. And what I quickly learned was that you can go fairly senior in an organization, and that business acumen gap is a lot bigger than you would ever imagine. Now, I'm not talking about unsophisticated companies. We worked with hundreds of thousands of people in over 40 countries, and have had a chance to work with 15 of the global Fortune 50. And so in all of these organizations, I've seen that similar gap. And I think the reason that gap exists is that as companies have grown, they tend to specialize. And as individuals specialize, I think they become very expert in their role, but really tend to lose that big picture perspective of how a company makes money. And so I still see that gap existing today, and therefore the importance of closing that business acumen gap is what we focus on now. Why is it important to have business acumen, and why not just leave decisions to the executives? Well, as you think about it, when a company needs to get work done, need to improve performance, it doesn't happen simply because you have a few executives at the top making a few strategic decisions. It happens because executives make good strategic bets. That's important, certainly. And then you need an organization aligned around that so that their actions are aligned with what performance is needed to meet those strategic objectives. And so organizations really need the whole team, all employees focused in the right direction, not just a few at the top, pulling a few levers and making a few decisions. And so as we work with organizations, we find that there are 4 or 5 scenarios where they come to us and say, boy, we've got a gap here, we need your help. One is with new leaders, maybe new emerging leaders. And we find that they've been a doer for their career, and now that they need to make business decisions, they need to understand the implications of what they do and how that impacts results. Another is with mid and senior level leaders who now need to manage a P&L for an organization. And so maybe, again, they understand sort of the function and the role, but not how their roles impact the financial results of the organization. We work a lot with high potentials. Maybe they're fairly senior in their career. And again, to make that next step, they really need to get that business savvy, that business acumen. We also work with functional groups like HR, IT, legal departments, in order to help them see how they fit in to the big picture of an organization. And lastly, we work with a lot of sales organizations. As salespeople call on their client, they need to understand their client's business, so when they position their products and services, they can do so in a way that helps their client achieve their business results, not just sell features and benefits, but actually sell business solutions to their clients.
Great. So versatile. And that just, I think, again, strikes a chord with so many of our experiences here in Australia. We have a client in Melbourne right now, and the executive team, every quarter, they feel like they end up diving back into the operation and dragging the result over the line. And some of that's their leadership style that they need to be a bit more effective in. Some of it that the team beneath them lacks the big picture. They lack the understanding of what is most important in my function today based on what the strategy is. So yeah, I love all your points.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, in reading the book, I did notice it's pretty prominent throughout the book. There's a model that you use to describe business acumen and to help people connect to it. Can you just describe that model for us a little bit?
Yeah, so you'll see that there are 5 business drivers: cash, profit, assets, growth, and people. And maybe it'd be helpful to start right in the middle on that people driver. And as you look at people, it's made up both of employees and customers. And so what you need happening at the very center of this model is engaged employees meeting and anticipating the needs of their customers. And if that happens, that drives the other 4: cash, profit, assets, and growth. Now, as I describe this model, I'll often start off in talking about cash. And the reason we start off talking about cash is, if a company doesn't succeed, the company fails, one of the most prominent reasons why is they underestimate their cash needs. So when you look at cash, we're talking about both the cash on hand and the cash flow or cash generation of a business. Profit is synonymous with earnings or net income or a company's bottom line. And basically, you're looking to improve that lever by either growing sales or sales price, or figuring out a way to be more efficient, or even cutting your costs. When you look at the asset people driver, that's balancing asset strength with asset utilization. In other words, companies need a strong asset base to accomplish their goals, to have the right assets, the right place at the right time. But they also want to be careful not to have too many assets in place that are unnecessary, like too much inventory or too much property, plant, and equipment. So there's a balance with assets. You need the assets at the right place at the right time, but not necessarily more assets than you need. Growth is there because growth is what drives value in a business. So CEOs are measured by growth. Investors expect growth. Suppliers and customers are attracted to companies that are growing because they tend to be innovative and future opportunity. And certainly employees are attracted to companies that are growing because they have upward mobility and opportunity to grow in their career. And so those 4: cash, profit, assets, growth, and people surround that important step of customers having their needs met by engaged employees in the organization. Now, the origin of this model wasn't pulled out of thin air, but it simply reflects the 3 financial statements that all successful companies focus on. Those 3 are the statement of cash flows, that aligns with the cash driver, the profit and loss, which obviously aligns with profit, and then the balance sheet, which shows assets, liabilities, and then equity or net assets. That aligns with the asset business driver. So when you look at this model, it simply reflects the three financials. Growth is there because that builds value in a business, and you make it happen through people in the center of that model.
Nice. Yeah, just as you were talking, I recall an organization we worked with last year. It was a consortium of small independent eye care optometry shops. And collectively, they came together and were investing in themselves essentially as small and medium enterprise leaders. And it was incredible as they each understood that they were carrying too much inventory in a certain frame type. And in some cases, some of the lenses they had weren't exactly, where they needed to be. And as they began then over the course of a few months to pull on that lever, that inventory lever, to see how that changed the shape of their business, because in a small organization, the impact's pretty quick.
Yeah.
So great example of just one of these levers when it comes to life in the business can really change everything.
And Eric, when you look at these 5 drivers, they're not static. They're very interdependent in nature. And so like you were describing, if you focus on one lever, it has a ripple effect on the others. So for example, if a company is really trying to focus in the moment on growth, well, growth takes cash investment. And as you're growing, because of that extra cash investment and cost, it tends to shrink profit. Growth can also have a negative impact on your assets. You might not have enough inventory to meet your needs, like you were just describing. Also, if you're growing quickly, it could have a negative impact on your people. You could burn your employees out or possibly not meet customers' quality needs. So as you focus on any one of these business drivers, it tends to have a ripple effect on the others. So people with good business acumen see this as a model, not static, but one that's very interdependent and very fluid, and they're constantly focusing on one lever and recognizing the impact that those decisions can have on the others.
Nice. So, you work with some pretty senior people, as you mentioned, in some pretty, well-known organizations. What's the link you see in this model and how CEOs think about their business?
Yeah. Well, first of all, as I mentioned, this model is based on the 3 financial statements. And if CEOs are part of a publicly traded company, they're actually required to report the results on those 3 financials and thus the performance on this business model every quarter and at year end. And so certainly they're required. But even CEOs of privately held companies still have to think about the performance on their financial statements. So there's a clear link between this model and what CEOs are constantly thinking about, how they measure their success, how they report their success to shareholders. And I also find that even though a CEO might not draw this model for you, they certainly are thinking about the 3 financials. Growth is paramount, and they know they've got to make it happen through employees meeting the needs of customers. So it really does fit the paradigm of the CEO. Now, I've also found that CEOs tend to focus on these differently based on what's going on in their business. As you think about some examples, Amazon, Jeff Bezos at Amazon has been all about growth in his business for years. Matter of fact, they went 7 years before they even turned a profit because they were so focused on growth. Well, in the last few years, shareholders have been kind of carrying that drumbeat of, look, we've got to be profitable as well. And so Jeff Bezos, while growth is still important, has had to raise the emphasis on profit and the focus on profit as well. You also have Apple that has just grown for years, but here in the last couple of years, their growth has slowed down. And so they're trying to really figure out ways to ramp that growth up. And short of having that growth, they're using their cash to pay dividends and buy back stock in order to get stock price up. So growth grew well for years. That's becoming more important, and also using their cash wisely to help satisfy shareholders. Tesla, if you think of Elon Musk at Tesla, he has created huge expectations with customers that they would produce. I think right now it's 2,000 new models a week. And they've fallen behind on that. So right now, I think Elon has a real challenge to help, make that customer feel like he somehow is going to make it whole. And if he doesn't satisfy the customer, well, that will impact all the other drivers. And then finally, Toys R Us, just declared bankruptcy here recently. Stores all over the world, many in Australia, I think 40 stores in Australia. And of course, their challenge has been with the whole change in retail. their profit has shrunk, and ultimately they've run out of cash. So right now, if there's any survivability left with any of the remaining, Toys R Us stores, it's how can they get enough cash to just stay afloat. So CEOs think about these 5 business drivers and differently based on the dynamics they're faced, based on what they're seeing in the industry, the headwinds they see, and the goals they're trying to accomplish.
Nice. Yeah. And as you tell those stories, you can just see how the model works and understand that even quarter to quarter, the emphasis might change. That makes a lot of sense.
No question. And maybe one last thought on that, Eric. I found that for companies that are sort of mature and performing well, I don't want to say in a steady state because obviously we need to either grow or die, but I find that most CEOs of companies that are doing pretty well, they emphasize primarily profit and growth. If you were to ask a CEO, boy, what is your key strategy? You'll hear something like to have sustainable, profitable growth or to grow profitably and sustainably. And so ultimately, most CEOs tend to focus on those two, profit and growth. It doesn't mean they ignore cash and assets and people. It's just if everything's going well, cash, people and assets are in place, and therefore that allows them to really focus on that profitable growth.
Great. Well, I'm sure our listeners and our viewers are getting the picture, pardon the pun. But so let's say I'm viewing this and I'm like, gosh, this is potentially a huge opportunity for myself, my team, my entire team. What would you suggest to leaders who would like to develop this skill or this capability in business acumen?
Yeah. Let me suggest 3 things. One, I would start with yourself and make sure you're building your own business acumen. And I don't say you build it because I think business acumen is something that's constantly developing. As the market changes, as the world changes, as economies change, as our companies change, we need to adapt with that. And so first, I would have a regimen for constantly becoming more aware and educated on your own business, on the industry that you're in, how your competitors are performing, what's happening with suppliers. And so number one, have a really good regimen of staying connected to business, not just your company's business, but the external environment around that, the economies as a whole, your industry in particular, your competitors. And so I would suggest that's step one. Second, I would see your role as not just a leader, but also a teacher. And I know a lot of companies have sort of a leader as teacher concept, but it's not as prevalent as I'd like to see, Eric. And so I would encourage number 2 that that as individuals, you change your paradigm to think, I'm looking for small opportunities and even big opportunities to educate and teach my team. And then 3, as you have that paradigm, communicate in ways that are more bite-sized. It's amazing. I find most executives, when they communicate, they download a bunch of data, a bunch of information, and 90% of it goes over the heads of their employees, especially around the business and financial metrics of a company. I think executives assume most people know what they know, and they forget they're unconsciously competent. They don't realize that what they know is sort of specialized, and as they communicate to employees, they really need to, when they communicate, maybe give an overall picture, but then spend most of your time trying to relay the importance of 1 or 2 key points. And in the process of communicating those 1 or 2 key points, maybe you focus on, profit margin for your company, for example. And in your next meeting, you describe the overall results, and then you go into profit margin, why that's important, how your company stacks up with others, and ways to improve that. And then ultimately, you need to connect that messaging, those bite-sized chunks, to what it means for individuals. What's their line of sight? People, especially millennials today, everybody is, but especially millennials, are hungry to know how they matter, how they fit in, and how they make a difference in their organizations. And so as leaders, help create that line of sight between here's what the company needs and here's what you can do in your role to help make that happen. I love the idea that people work hard for a paycheck, they'll work harder for a person, and they'll work hardest for a purpose. And so the more that you can give them that big picture sense of where the company's headed and here's how you're a part of making that happen, that's what really engages employees.
Oh, fantastic. So just to recap those 3 points. So start with yourself, take your role as a leader to also mean your role as a teacher, and build that into your team around you. And then third, find ways to communicate those things in smaller chunks, connecting them to people's roles so that they hopefully can take the right actions based on their role. Fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, you got it, Eric. Nicely done.
Well, Kevin, gosh, we could spend hours, but I want to keep this short for our audience. Thank you so much for your time, and I know occasionally you make your way to Australia, so when you're next here, we'll do it in person.
Yeah, would love to.
All right, we'll leave it there for today. Thanks, everyone, for joining Leadership Conversations. This has been our guest, Kevin Cope from Acumen Learning, and we look forward to seeing all of you very soon.